The film begins 3,200 years in time when things were a bit different. There was this king named Agamemnon, and succeeded in making almost all of mainland Greece his allies. But there was this one place called Thessaly that he couldn't conquer. Greece's strongest rival was the Trojan kingdom, and Agamemnon had ambitions to rule it. Greece had some tough guys, and one of them was Achilles, but he didn't want to follow Agamemnon's orders. One day, Agamemnon decided it was time to fight Thessaly again, but they'd fought so much that lots of soldiers had already died. So Agamemnon made an agreement to pair their best soldiers together. If Thessaly wins, Agamemnon will no longer disturb Thessaly territory. But if Agamemnon wins, Thessaly must submit to him. The king of Thessaly called his big, strong warrior Boagrius. Agamemnon also wanted Achilles, even though he wasn't part of the army at that moment. People thought Achilles couldn't be killed because his mom was a goddess, but Achilles himself didn't think he was anything special. He just wanted a shield. Eventually, though, he showed up for the fight. Now Greece was ruled by Agamemnon and his buddy Menelaus, who had a young wife named Helen. They had a big party because Troy and Sparta decided to become allies. Troy had two princes, Paris and Hector. Paris wasn't really good at fighting, but Hector was the strongest Trojan soldier with his sword skills. It turns out that Helen was having a secret love affair with Paris, and they were sneaking around quite a bit. Menelaus, Helen's husband, didn't really care about her. He saw her as just someone to have kids with. He was known for playing around with other women too, but Paris and Helen were head over heels for each other. Hector, Paris's brother, knew all about their love story, and he was ready to knock Paris out if he put Troy in danger. The next morning, when they got back to Troy, it turned out that Paris was determined to take Helen away. Hector was super mad because of Paris' stupidity. For years, their dad had been working hard to make peace with Sparta, and now Paris was messing everything up. Menelaus found out that his wife had been kidnapped by Paris, and he was boiling with anger. Menelaus called his brother Agamemnon for help. Agamemnon was his real brother, and Menelaus felt like his honor had been tarnished. He asked Agamemnon to team up and fight against Troy. People said that the Trojan army had never been beaten before, so Agamemnon decided to gather all the Greek soldiers for this big battle. Agamemnon's advisor, Nestor, thought they needed Achilles and his 50 best fighters to win, but Agamemnon couldn't stand Achilles. The guy was too stubborn and never followed orders. Still, because Achilles was really good at winning wars, Agamemnon finally said yes. The following morning, a messenger was dispatched to find the king of Ithaca, Odysseus, who was the only person that Achilles respected. They wanted Odysseus to convince Achilles to join the war. Odysseus arrived where Achilles was training his cousin Patroclus in sword skills. Achilles wasn't too keen on fighting for Agamemnon. He felt like this war was none of his business. It all started because of the king's wife being kidnapped. Odysseus told Achilles that he didn't have to fight for Agamemnon, but for Greece and himself. He also warned Achilles about Hector, the strong prince of Troy. Even the mightiest Greek warriors might struggle to defeat him. Later, Achilles had a chat with his mother, who urged him to go to war. She wanted him to be remembered for taking part in this significant Trojan war. Eventually, Achilles decided to join the battle. In the kingdom of Troy, Priam, the king of Troy and the father of Hector and Paris, welcomed their guests, including Paris's future wife. Hector took some time to visit his wife, Andromache, and their newborn baby boy. Briseis, who was Hector and Paris's cousin, also arrived. Hector wanted Helen to be sent back to Sparta, but Priam disagreed, fearing that Paris would follow her. Hector warned that Sparta and Greece would attack, and Troy wouldn't be able to win. However, Priam had faith in the strong walls of his city and believed that Apollo, the god worshipped by the Trojans, would protect them. The Trojan soldiers prepared for battle, strengthening their defenses along the coast and crafting new weapons. Soon, they spotted 1,000 Greek ships carrying 50,000 troops. Achilles and his 50 strongest warriors were on a ship ahead of the others, ready to attack without waiting for Agamemnon's orders. Even though Patroclus was eager to fight, Achilles felt he wasn't quite prepared yet and asked him to guard the ship. Hector instructed his troops to bring the citizens inside the city fortress, preparing for the battle ahead. Achilles readied the Myrmidon and his 50 best warriors, believing it was better to fight with them than with 1,000 other soldiers. And so, the coastal war began. Without the support of the 1,000 ships, The Myrmidons managed to kill many of the Trojan soldiers, pushing them back towards their city. Achilles then ordered his men to loot the treasures in the priest's temple, showing no fear of Troy's guardian god, Apollo. Soon, Hector and his companions arrived. Hector's troops entered the temple and were immediately attacked by Achilles' soldiers. Hector challenged Achilles to a fight, upset that the unarmed temple priests had been killed. However, Achilles didn't want to fight at that moment because he believed that no one should miss witnessing Hector's death. Most of Hector's army had already been defeated, and Achilles decided to spare Hector, throwing him out of the temple. He intentionally let Hector go, as he believed it wasn't the right time to kill the prince. Meanwhile, Eudorus, who was close to Achilles, revealed Briseis, who had been captured by soldiers in the temple. Briseis couldn't accept that Achilles had killed the priests of Apollo, but it turned out that Achilles had never killed a single priest during the war. It was his men who had done so. Greek soldiers began constructing forts along the coast. Later, kings from different regions of Greece presented gifts to Agamemnon to honor his success in controlling the coastal area of Troy. Then, they were all asked to leave, as Agamemnon wanted to speak privately with Achilles. Agamemnon made it clear that kings wouldn't bow down to Achilles, and history would remember Agamemnon, not just Achilles, who was a mere soldier. Agamemnon's taunts angered Achilles even more, especially when Agamemnon mentioned having fun with Briseis. For some reason, Achilles tried to protect her. Achilles had had enough of Agamemnon. He swore that before he died, he would smile at Agamemnon's lifeless body. In Troy, many soldiers had lost their lives, and the priests and nobles believed their city's walls were impenetrable, assuring victory due to their skilled archers and their best warrior, Hector. But Paris didn't want the war to continue since he was the one who caused this problem. So, he planned to invite Menelaus to a duel the next morning to settle the matter and win back Helen. Paris expressed his deep love for Helen, much like his father's love for Troy. Priam even gave a historic sword to Troy for future battles. Andromache, Hector's wife, didn't want to lose him because Greece's goal was to target Troy as a whole and kill Hector, their strongest warrior. As Hector was on his way to meet Paris, he spotted Helen about to flee. Helen seemed ready to surrender to Menelaus due to the deaths caused by her actions. However, Hector stopped her, knowing it wouldn't change anything. Agamemnon and his troops were still determined to attack Troy. The next morning, Greek soldiers geared up for battle, but Achilles hesitated about joining in. It took Agamemnon's pleading for Achilles to finally agree to fight. Meanwhile, Trojan soldiers were also prepared. Paris remained confident in his decision and didn't blame Helen, believing it was God's will. Suddenly, the Greek troops arrived, and the leaders met. Agamemnon proposed peace with the condition that Helen be returned, and Troy must submit to him. Hector refused, as none of Troy's sons would bow to a foreign ruler. Paris then challenged Menelaus to a duel for Helen, with the promise that the war would end afterward. Initially, Agamemnon disagreed because he wanted control over Troy, but Menelaus sought revenge. If Paris were defeated, Greece could swiftly invade Troy, and so the duel began. Paris, who lacked combat experience and had never taken a life, found himself completely overwhelmed. The Greeks initiated their attack, but since the Trojans defended near the walls, it was evident that the odds were not in favor of the Greeks. Many Greek soldiers felt at arrows from above. Then Hector confronted Ajax, one of the mightiest warriors aside from Achilles. With the mounting casualties among the Greeks, Agamemnon decided to call for a retreat. After the battle concluded, they prepared to cremate the fallen soldiers, and Agamemnon pledged to his younger brother that they would conquer and burn the city of Troy. The morale of the Greek soldiers was dropping. They needed Achilles to boost their spirits, but since Agamemnon still refused to meet with Achilles, it was up to Odysseus to persuade him. Meanwhile, Briseis faced harassment from some Greek soldiers. Achilles intervened to help her. Achilles shared his perspective with Briseis, expressing his disbelief in gods. Later, as Achilles slept, Briseis initially contemplated harming him. However, instead of a fight, something unexpected happened. They became romantically involved, and from that moment on, unknowingly, they fell in love with each other. The following morning, Odysseus tried to convince Achilles to rejoin the war, as the Greek soldiers desperately needed his help. However, Achilles remained determined to go back home. Meanwhile, in Troy, the priests and nobles suggested launching an immediate attack on Greece, believing that the enemy's morale had already crumbled, although Hector restrained their ambitions because Achilles' troops had not yet entered the battle. But Priam trusted the words of the priests, who predicted a victory for Troy. Achilles was awakened from his sleep by a noise, only to discover that Troy had launched a surprise attack early in the morning. Greek soldiers quickly prepared for battle, but the Trojans seemed to be winning. They had surrounded the coastline with tens of thousands of soldiers, banging their shields and spears to further demoralize the Greeks. Just as the Greek soldiers began to lose hope, Achilles and his Myrmidons arrived, and the battle commenced. Eventually, Achilles faced off against Hector in a duel that all the soldiers witnessed, only to discover that it wasn't Achilles, but Patroclus. The battle came to an end. Achilles, in his tent, learned of his cousin's death and was overwhelmed with anger and grief. He cremated Patroclus with vengeance in his heart. Hector shared a plan with Andromache, providing a route to a safe place for her to escape with as many citizens as possible. He did this in case Greece surrendered and he met his demise, as he knew that Greece would come to kill everyone, possibly even enslaving the women. After his defeat in the duel, Paris decided to practice archery. The following morning, Achilles planned to head to Troy alone to seek revenge for Hector. Briseis tried to stop him, but Achilles was determined and reached the formidable fortress of the Trojan kingdom. Before their duel, Hector apologized for his past mistakes and bid farewell to Paris. He also shared a kiss with his beloved child and wife. Hector proposed an agreement that the winner would allow the loser to receive a proper burial, but Achilles no longer cared about such terms. As evidence of the two strongest warriors, they initially fought on equal footing, but Achilles soon gained the upper hand and defeated Hector. Afterward, Achilles departed, dragging Hector's lifeless body while gazing at all the people there. That night, Priam sneaked into Achilles' tent. He pleaded for his son's body to be returned for a proper burial. Achilles had taken Hector's life, and Priam thought it was lucky that Achilles' father had already passed away, unlike himself, who had to witness his own son's death. Priam asked Achilles to allow him to wash, pray for, and bury his child. Even though they were still enemies, Priam believed that showing respect was important. Achilles acknowledged that Hector had been his most formidable foe. He agreed to the request, saying that Greece would not attack Troy for the next 12 days due to the funeral ceremony. Achilles freed Briseis and gave her a necklace. He praised Priam, saying that Priam was a better king than the Greek king Agamemnon. The funeral ceremony for Hector was conducted. Meanwhile, Odysseus, who saw soldiers carving wooden horse-shaped toys, came up with an idea. The scene shifted to Achilles, who apologized to Eudorus for hitting him. Achilles asked Eudorus to take the Myrmidon army and return home, staying out of the war. Achilles felt he needed to continue fighting there. After 12 days, something surprising happened. The Greek soldiers had vanished from the beach, leaving behind only a massive horse-shaped statue. The Greeks had built these horse statues as offerings to the god Poseidon, whom they respected and hoped would ensure their safe journey home. Strangely, they decided to give this horse statue as a gift to the Trojans. Paris wanted to burn the statue, but the priests, who held the god in high regard, didn't want to risk injuring the deity by destroying his offerings. So Priam decided to bring the giant horse into Troy. The people of Troy cheered, seeing the horse as a symbol of their victory. However, there was a hidden danger. Some Greek soldiers had concealed themselves inside the statue and quietly killed the sleeping guards. They then opened the gates, allowing tens of thousands of Greek soldiers to sneak into Troy early in the morning. They slaughtered the men, mistreated and later killed the women, and set buildings on fire, causing destruction throughout Troy. This was in line with Agamemnon's promise to his younger brother, Menelaus. Achilles searched for Briseis, determined to find her. Meanwhile, Andromache led the residents to a pass to save themselves, but Paris couldn't join them. He had to protect his father and search for Briseis. Paris handed over the Trojan sword to a young man, a symbol of hope for the Trojan people's future. With a heavy heart, he also had to part ways with Helen. Greece had reached the royal gates of Troy, and they were on the brink of breaking through. The sacred statues of gods were smashed, and Priam was killed by Agamemnon. In a dramatic twist, Briseis, who had been praying, took a sword and stabbed Agamemnon in the neck just as he was about to kill her. Soldiers were ready to end Briseis' life, but Achilles rushed to her aid. However, Achilles got struck by an arrow and struggled to stand. Paris kept shooting arrows at him, And as Achilles lay dying, he spoke of how Brises had brought peace to his troubled heart before passing away. Andromache and the survivors managed to escape to safety, putting a significant distance between themselves and the now devastated Troy. Meanwhile, Odysseus and the other soldiers paid their final respects to Achilles. The moral lesson from the story is that seeking revenge and letting pride guide one's actions can lead to destruction and tragedy.